Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville, your host. Tonight is September 21st, 2015, and the show, to tell you right off the bat, is being pre-recorded on September 19th, 2015. We usually try to record the show as close as possible to the actual broadcast time, but which is usually Sunday, but unfortunately this weekend we weren't able to do that on Sunday, so we had to record it on Saturday. So be aware of that as things could change a bit in the field as in 2 days. 2 days is quite a long time sometimes with current events, but we're going to do our best to stay on top of them and get some relevant commentary out. A lot of the stuff we're going to be talking about is no doubt going to be in the news on Monday, on the 21st, so I think we're safe there. We're going to talk about the immigration crisis. I tried to explain that last week, but we ran out of time. I should have started at the beginning, and that's what I'll do tonight. I'll start at the beginning with the immigration crisis in Europe and the situation in Syria, perhaps Russian-Swedish relations, and we'll also I think we covered that last week, so we'll move on to some other issues. Of course, Japan is another issue tonight that we'll cover, and perhaps make some commentary about the Republican clown show, also called the debates. 4 hours worth of debates, of talk of war, and more war, even World War III by some participants. So we'll make some brief commentary on that if we can. Now, for those of you who are joining us tonight for the first time, I'd like to remind you to catch Truth on the Tracks every Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on ucy.tv. You can access the show's personal webpage at ucy.tv/TT for Truth on the Tracks. On that website, you'll find the archive versions of the show in MP3 format. You'll find the YouTube videos, and you'll find the links to my more recent articles and the show player. If you're interested in my work specifically, then check out activistpost.com, naturalblaze.com, theantimedia.org. These are websites that I write for regularly. Now, I should mention that Truth on the Tracks is now being rebroadcast, as I mentioned last week, being rebroadcast 7 nights a week here on ucy.tv at different times. You can go to the schedule page and check out when those times are if you want to hear the broadcast at a different time. You can also hear the archives at brandonturbeville.com, but being rebroadcast here 7 nights a week, and also being broadcast at Reality Bites Radio over there as well. The show's listenership has grown exponentially. This time last year, in terms of the listeners versus this time, this year, is quite the difference. I mean, we have really grown in terms of listenership, and in fact, in the last few months, the show really has grown exponentially in the people that are listening to it. So I want to thank you for your continued support of the show and sharing the links and the articles and telling people about the information that you find here. So thank you for that. We want to continue to promote this program because I think a lot of people are going to find information here that they don't find anywhere else, including in the alternative media, which seems to be losing its moorings of late. And perhaps we'll be able to mention that at some point later in the broadcast. Now, my work specifically, I would encourage you to go to brandonturbeville.com, and that is the website where I repost all of my articles, all of the YouTube videos, all of the archive versions of this show. All of the relevant information is there. There's a books tab there. You can go click on that, and you can find the books. You can also find an events tab. You can find the contact information, bio information as well. Now, last week I introduced some changes to brandonturbeville.com and made some announcements. So first, let's make the announcement. I mentioned last week that a new book on Hillary Clinton by me would be released in the coming weeks. Well, it's being released on September 21st, 2015. So by the time you hear this broadcast, the book will be available, and you'll be able to find it at my website in the books tab. You'll be able to click on the hard copy book. I should mention that the book is going to be released in 3 different formats. I'm releasing it in hard copy form And you can buy that book. It's going to be sold for, I believe, $9.99, which is not making much off of that. So it's really just getting it out there. It's going to be released in a Kindle version for 99 cents, and I'm also going to release it in a PDF for free. And this is going to be all available at my website. We should have all of the widgets and the advertisements up for the book. And if you can also go to thebookpatch.com, which is the website of the publisher, and search my name and find the Hillary Clinton book there as well. If for some reason we're not able to get it up on the website, but we should have it up by then, certainly. And again, buy all three, buy just one, buy one or two. It's up to you. If you want a hard copy version, then certainly the hard copy version's there. It's going to take shipping, days to be shipped, and it's going to be $9.99. If you want to read it on your Kindle, it's only 99 cents. I have to charge that. I would have given it away for free on Kindle, but there was no way around that for what I'm trying to do. And the PDF, if you can't afford even the Kindle, then we've got a PDF, which we hope to be releasing on something like Scribd, where you can just click on it, download it, or click on it and open it up and read it as a PDF file. So all of that stuff is going to be available. And, of course, we're going to be really hitting the Hillary Clinton campaign hard over the next couple of weeks. And, again, this is not an endorsement of Bernie Sanders. This is not an endorsement of the Syrian rebel supporter Bernie. We're not trying to feel the burn. And this is not an endorsement of any lunatic reactionary Republican in the Republican race who wants to start World War III so that certain people in this country who sit around and watch sports all day can feel tough about themselves as they engage the world in conflagration. None of that. But we do recognize that there are worst-case scenarios sometimes, and we try to prevent those worst-case scenarios if we can. And Hillary Clinton certainly represents a worst-case scenario. This woman is evil, and that should be clear from her record as a lawyer, from her record as an activist, from her record as consultants, as her record as First Lady of Arkansas, First Lady of the United States, Secretary of State, U.S. Senator, Clinton campaign, a political campaigner. All of this stuff, anything she's done, she's shown that she is truly an evil person working for the oligarchy. So we're going to put this book out. It's 360 pages of information about Hillary Clinton. There's not, all of the citations are made in the footnotes, so this is not 60 pages worth of bibliography, for instance. This is 360 pages of information about Hillary. And to be honest, this is not an in-depth study of Hillary Clinton. It's called, I should have mentioned the title, it's called The Difference It Makes, 36 Reasons Why Hillary Clinton Should Never Be President. And again, there are 36 reasons in this book why Hillary Clinton should not be president, but there are many more reasons why she shouldn't be president, simply because I wanted to get this done before the primaries. And in order to get something done well before the primaries, in this instance, I wanted to really put things down that, to kind of list all of the reasons that Hillary Clinton shouldn't be president, some of the evil things that she's been a part of. But I realized that if I didn't stop now, I'd term. I left a lot of things out in this book, to be honest. Still got 36 reasons and 360 pages worth of material showing you why Hillary Clinton should not be given access to the White House again for the third time, or I guess the fourth if you count both of Clinton's terms. So we got to point that out. There are things like Hillary Clinton's obsession with Planned Parenthood, her worship of racist Margaret Sanger, and the eugenics policies of that lunatic. That is not included in the book, but nevertheless we have a lot of material there. So again, PDF, Kindle, hard copy, you can pick it all up. Go to BrandonTurbeville.com. If you're listening to the show tonight, just go on to BrandonTurbeville.com, see if you can find it there in the books tab. There may be an announcement, but you should also be able to find the PDF file and the Kindle tab as well to be able to pick that up and share it around. I encourage you to do that. You get this information, give it out for free. I don't need you to really spend a whole bunch of money on this. So just take it. If you got a bunch of friends that you want to loan the Kindle version to, go ahead. You want to take the PDF link and then send it around to 100,000 people, I don't care. I put it out in PDF for free for a reason. So we'll have more information coming out on the website about Hillary as well in the next few days. Okay. Now, just a quick word about the website itself, and then we'll go on to some actual information. The website's got a number of improvements. I mentioned we've included not only my Twitter feed, but we've included the Twitter feed of a lot of other good researchers and good websites. We've included the RSS feed. In other words, we'll have little boxes to the right of my material with links to the most recent articles from relevant websites and relevant researchers there as well. You can subscribe to the website if you'd like. There's a tab for that. And, of course, we've added the translation page. So if you want to read this in another language, and this is good for international visitors, then just go to the top right-hand corner, see where it says Translate, click on Select Language, and pick your language, and that's all you got to do. If you want to send this over to somebody overseas, you can translate the articles there. So all of that is available, and there are going to be more updates. We're going to add more stuff to the website. Never fear. There's a lot more coming to the website, and there's actually, in the coming months, going to be probably some other improvements in the way that these books get out as well. So we're going to try to gradually implement positive changes over the next few months. Now, enough of the self-promotion. Encourage you to go to BrandonTurbeville.com one last time. And I wanted to pick up where I left off, or maybe even go back a bit from where I left off last week and talk about the European immigration crisis and what this means. Who started it, why, who's responsible, etc. Now, you got to look at all these immigrants streaming across Europe, and you've got to ask the question of what is the ultimate goal here. This immigration crisis has not formed organically, and it has not formed in a vacuum. Right? The people who are trying to come into Europe, and they have been doing so over the last few weeks, are a diverse group of people, but most of them are coming from places where the United States and the West and NATO have brought their peace and democracy in the last few years in the form of bombs or troops or proxy terrorists. In other words, we can say that the immigration crisis, in whatever form it's taken, has been created entirely by the West. In whatever form you look at it, whether you look at it in terms of the immigration rules that are upheld by the European Union, whether you look at it through the war-mongering of the United States, NATO, and Europe, or whether you look at it in terms of the economic totalitarianism imposed by organizations like the IMF on other third world countries, it was entirely created by the West, and I think that is a fair term to point out. So a lot of this started, we saw pictures, for instance, of this dead Syrian boy who was with his family trying to escape from Syria, allegedly, and coming to Europe. And the boat had some issues. I guess the boat sank or turned over, and a lot of the people drowned. And there was this photo of this little boy who had drowned, and his body had washed up on the shore. And this was a photo that was paraded around the Western mainstream media. This little boy, of course, was not fleeing Assad. His family was trying to escape from the democracy of the beheadings and the rapes and the Allahu Akbar chanting bearded fanatic freaks who are funded by NATO, as that's who they were trying to escape. But this photo was used as a prime example. It's of what's happening in the Middle East, but it was used in order to, in a way, drum up sympathy for the Syrian refugees, or for the refugees, I guess I should say. We'll get into why I'm not calling them all Syrian refugees in a second. But it was pulling on the heartstrings of the American public, the Western public, and that's ironic because when it comes to Syrians in general, the Western public doesn't seem to have any heart at all, except in this case they did. But again, they were showing this picture of a little child, and this is a tragedy, whichever way you look at it, regardless of what happened and who started it and all that. It's a tragedy that this boy is dead and drowned and washed up on the shores of Turkey. But notice that nothing was said about a little girl who was about the same age as the boy in that photo who was killed in a car bomb in Latakia around about the same time. She was a victim of the moderate rebels, right, who beheaded and raped their way all across Syria. She died a violent death, just like the boy. She was killed as a result of this conflict, just like the boy. But the Western media remained completely silent regarding her case, and of course the cases of thousands of children that have been killed by these Western-backed terrorists operating in Syria over the last few years. Only on the case of this dead Syrian boy was the media indignant. Of course, the media attempted to blame the death of the little boy and his family, and in fact all the Syrian refugees, on Assad's cruelty and his barrel bombs. Right? This is what we're being told, that Assad is responsible for all of this. But if you were to listen to the Western media, it would seem like not one single civilian has ever died at the hands of these moderate cannibals. But according to the mainstream press, all of them are responsible, or all of them are the fault of Assad. Of course, in reality, this whole destabilization was initiated by the West, and Assad hasn't done anything but defend his people and his country. There's no evidence yet, still, years on, there's no evidence yet that the Syrian military has ever intentionally targeted civilians at all. Assad is widely popular in Syria, for instance. Unlike the terrorists that the West has been supporting, they're eating Syrian soldiers and buying Syrian girls as sex slaves. So ask yourself this: if the Syrian refugees were escaping Syria because of Assad and his cruelty, why didn't we witness an immigration crisis in 2008? In fact, why didn't we witness an immigration crisis in 2009 or 2010? In fact, why haven't we seen a mass exodus until now? Why all of a sudden? So let's look at the answer here. The first part of this answer is because it's the Syrian refugees fleeing savages, terrorists, barbarians, Western bombs. They're not fleeing Assad at all. They're fleeing ISIS. They're fleeing Al-Qaeda. They're fleeing al-Nusra, and they're fleeing the Free Syrian Army, and they're fleeing the moderate rebels. That's what they're fleeing. They're fleeing NATO and America's brave boys in uniform who are dropping bombs on Syrian infrastructure. That's what they're fleeing. They're fleeing the American F-16s, not Assad. So there's another issue here, of course, is that with the terrorists taking over so much territory in eastern Syria, we have a number of Syrians who are being displaced. Of course, that should tell you something. Whenever the terrorists take over, the Syrian people run, and they run into government-held territory. So in places like Latakia, they've been overrun by people in their own country who are leaving places like Raqqa, Dera, places like that. They're going to Latakia because that's a government stronghold, and it's really putting a strain on the humanitarian assistance that can be provided by the Syrian government. But let's look at this. Now, once that happens, and with the ISIS push west, what you see is that you get this really almost like a bottleneck created in places like Latakia, where the amount of people who are seeking help and security in Latakia are becoming almost too much to manage. And of course they're trying to manage it because it's their own people, of course. So the question is, how many refugees, and internal refugees, I guess, maybe, I don't know, can you call someone internally a refugee? But with all these people in Latakia, there is almost a lot of pressure being created, and so when they push west, when ISIS pushes west, it creates a situation where these people have to go somewhere. They're not getting pushed out by the government, but simply by the fact that more people are pouring in to these areas. But there's more to it than that, and we'll get into it. Let's stay on to this this topic of whether or not the Syrians are fleeing Assad versus the terrorists. Right? We had an interview conducted by a Turkish television station called the Immigrants channel, and they went out to interview some of the Syrians who were trying to escape Syria. And what they found, of course, is that the Syrians are not trying to go to the golden streets of Europe, but they're trying to be able to get out of the country so they can wait until the conflict is over, so they can go home, which is what they want to do. So the interviewer for Haaretz asked, says, in Turkey, they say that Assad's army is oppressing you and destroying your homes. Is this true? The refugee says, no, this is completely wrong. The Syrian army rescued me. Another refugee says, we used to live in extreme security, thank God. Another refugee says, the world must see what is happening in Syria. If it gets destroyed, it will get rebuilt, whether it's at the level of the leadership or the people. Anyone that says there's a free Syrian army, I tell them, no, there is terrorism. The terrorism is done via external conspiracy with external financing, but we are alive, we are returning, end quote. So what you see here is that even though a people have been bombarded with terrorism and warfare, they've lacked adequate food, adequate electricity, adequate news, and they're thousands and thousands of miles away from where this conspiracy is supposed to take place, these people still have a vastly superior understanding of international affairs and what is happening both in their country and ours than the average American does. The average American, of course, could tell you all about football. They could tell you all about Miley Cyrus, but they couldn't tell you a thing about Syria. In fact, I wager a bet that a quarter of them couldn't even point it out on a map. That's an embarrassment. It's an absolute embarrassment. But that's what America's been good at lately, is embarrassing itself all across the world. Now, again, the Syrian refugee situation, entirely created by the West from the very beginning. The crisis was created by the West, the crisis in Syria in general, and now the refugee crisis was created by the West. It's precisely the United States, NATO, and Israel that have the blood of these children on their hands. If it wasn't for the meddling and aggression of these countries, both the drowned Syrian boy and the dead Syrian girl would still be alive today. So it's their fault. We can lay blame in this situation. We can lay blame on the terrorists in Syria. We can lay blame on America, on the Turks, on the Israelis, on every single member of NATO. It's your fault. You killed these children. And we should never forget that they are responsible for that. Now, the question is Turkey pushing Syrian refugees into Europe? Now, it should be noted that the influx of Syrian refugees into Europe, now it's beginning now in these massive numbers. It really began a couple of weeks ago in these massive numbers. It's taken place simultaneously with immigrants coming from other locations in the Middle East and North Africa. It's not only the result of that pressure valve resulting from the ISIS push west that I mentioned a few minutes ago, but it's also from apparent deliberate action by Turkey. And we have the article by Kathimerini in Greece. This is a newspaper in Greece. And the article is entitled, Refugee Flow Linked to Turkish Policy Shift. And this is what it says. A sharp increase in the influx of migrants and refugees, mostly from Syria, into Greece is due in part to a shift in Turkey's geopolitical tactics, according to diplomatic sources. These officials link the wave of migrants into the eastern Aegean to political pressures in neighboring Turkey, which is bracing for snap elections in November, and to a recent decision by Ankara to join the U.S. in bombing Islamic State targets in Syria. The analyses of several officials indicate that the influx from neighboring Turkey is taking place as Turkish officials look the other way or actively promote the exodus. All right, end quote. So we've got these catastrophes that are meant to look sudden and unexpected and unstoppable, but they're actually allowed to unfold. And they have this operational theater which is completely controlled by the United States and NATO. Right? Remember, Turkey is a part of NATO, and it's using these desperate or exploited refugees intentionally sent out of Turkey and into Europe against people who are also desperate and exploited in in Europe. Now, Tony Carlucci, by the way, has a good article about this as well called Social Engineering 101, How to Make a Refugee Crisis, and I would encourage you to go check that out. But he talks a lot about the same issues that I'm talking about here. But keep in mind that Turkey has had a very enthusiastic open-door policy for Syrian refugees, and it's a very suspicious policy as well. They've spent tons of money, right, inexplicable sums of money and political capital in accommodating these refugees in Turkey. And the reason I say this is suspicious is because the Turks clearly have no concern for the welfare of the Syrian people. I mean, after all, they've been training and arming and coordinating and directing, facilitating ISIS and Al-Qaeda and all these other moderate cannibals to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dead civilians, unthinkable atrocities, the displacement of much of the country. Turkey might care about many things in the world, but the welfare of the Syrian people is not one of them. So that's why it's certainly questionable. Now, we even had Foreign Policy writing an article entitled "What Turkey's Open Door Policy Means for Syrian Refugees" back in 2015, this year. It says Turkey is now the world's largest recipient of refugees. Since October 2013, the number of Syrian refugees has increased more than threefold and now numbers almost 2 million registered refugees, end quote. So, despite the neglect of the concern for Syrian people in general, Turkey managed to take in about 2 million refugees. Now these refugees have been streaming out of Turkey and into Europe in a manner that suggests a concerted effort behind the exodus. So, one more thing about Turkey. Turkey bears responsibility for a lot of these immigrants, these refugees who have drowned in the ocean. The reason they bear the responsibility for that is because they are in control of the method that these immigrants and refugees take, the travel route that they take, right, the sea route, because it's unnecessary to take the sea route to travel to Europe from Turkey. Turkey is connected to Europe by land in two locations, in Bulgaria and Greece. Why have the refugees not been allowed to enter Europe through the land route? Why have the Turks not facilitated this passage? Instead, the Turks forced them to take the sea route, resulting in the drowning and deaths of a large number of asylum seekers. So it's Turkey not allowing them to go into Europe through the borders. They're pushing them in these rickety boats to go across the ocean and try to wash up on the shores of Europe. Now, about the refugees themselves, there seems to be a concerted effort to recruit more fundamentalist elements of these foreign societies for relocation in Europe. Sources inside Syria have informed me personally. My sources inside Syria, I should say, have informed me that the more fundamentalist Muslims in Syria seem to be given preferential treatment for refugee status. Now, this isn't to say that the Syrian refugees in general are fundamentalist, or even that the majority of them are of this variety. We don't want to paint with too broad a brush, but it's difficult to avoid seeing that the more fundamentalist refugees seem to be given greater attention and assistance in making their way to European countries. It's also need to be pointed out that many of the migrant groups that have been seen rioting and protesting in Europe seem to be entirely made up of men, particularly younger men. So what kind of war produces more male refugees than female refugees, or more male men than children? And what kind of country accepts the men first and wants to accept the women and children later? Something truly is amiss here. So it's also important to point out that the immigrants that are finding their way to Europe now are not all Syrian. In fact, many of the immigrants are coming from all across the Middle East and North Africa. Some are showing that many of the immigrants are declared as Syrian, but are in reality from other locations, right? They because of the nature of the conflict, it's easier to claim yourself as a Syrian refugee in order to receive some of the privileges given to Syrians by a number of European countries as a result of the crisis. So that's what a lot of them are doing. We've got people coming from Pakistan, from Eritrea, from Bangladesh, from Afghanistan, from Nigeria, from refugees coming from all over the Middle East and North Africa, even sub-Saharan Africa. They're heading to Europe in droves. Many of them, of course, are claiming Syrian nationality and being granted refugee status once they reach the shore. But we need to talk a minute about the situation and what it's like for the Europeans, because this is something that's got a lot of people split in the discussion. Now, we at this show have a certain affinity for the Syrian people, and I think we've demonstrated that, and our reputation is like few others in the alternative media, certainly in the mainstream. In that regard, the question of should the refugees be allowed in? Well, short answer is no, they shouldn't be. But that's not the solution, and we'll talk more about the solutions later on. But the solution is to stop funding the damn savages in Syria. Stop funding ISIS. Stop funding Al-Qaeda. Stop funding al-Nusra. Give up on the moderate rebels. Give up on trying to throw Assad out of power. In fact, you should work with Assad. You should stop funding terrorism. Hell, you can arm the Kurds. That's not a bad idea. You could ship arms to Syria, as a matter of fact, to wipe up these terrorists, get them out of Syria, get them out of Iraq. You can let the forces on the ground take care of this. You can end color revolutions in Lebanon. You can end any kind of destabilization activity in Syria. Let things get back to normal. Let Assad deal with the terrorists, and he will deal with the terrorists. You can tell Saudi Arabia to stop funding monkeys in Syria. You can tell Turkey to stop facilitating them as well. You can work with Assad, work with the Assad government in helping them, giving them intelligence to wipe up the terrorists, and then when it's over, you can engage in this type of economic rebuilding effort for Syria. And it doesn't have to be simply giving the Syrian government money. There would be concerns about corruption from a lot of people. Fine, okay, so what you'll do, you can use a nationalized Fed, or at least partially nationalized for this purpose, and you could take an order for materials and equipment and services that are necessary to rebuild Syria, and you can produce those things here using the credit from the partially nationalized Fed or fully nationalized Fed is what we'd hope, to use that to build the products and the equipment and the material here and ship it to the Syrian government. So no money would ever have to change hands. Just products would make it to Syria for the purpose of rebuilding. The Syrian people do not want to come here so they can debate gender politics and get sex changes. They want to come here because they want to get away from the fighting. They want to get back to Syria. That is their home. That is the place they love. That is where they want to be. It might seem unbelievable to most Americans and indeed many Europeans that maybe somebody doesn't want to be here, but they don't. They want to be in Syria. They want to have the quality of life that they had before we destroyed it. So we hope that they're able to do it. Now, back to the refugee question. We have a number of countries who are now backing away from some of the alleged policies of the Schengen Agreement, which is the free travel in Europe agreement. Hungary has been the most outspoken country who's refused to take in any more refugees. Orban is the prime minister, and we don't like Orban, for the record. We're not a fan of Orban, but in this instance, he's right. Now, again, this crisis entirely created by the West, but you can't let all of these immigrants come in. Europe has been destroyed with immigration over the last 20 to 30 years. Particularly, I'd say about 20 to 30 years at the most. You see, Europe was never a melting pot. This melting pot crap is created by people who promote cultural Marxism and cultural destruction, right? And it's perpetuated by white liberals who are full of white guilt and simply can't take the fact that other people have cultures that maybe they don't necessarily agree with. So the idea now New York, of course, one could argue has always been a melting pot, right? This is where immigrants came in legally, of course. they managed to traverse the Atlantic Ocean in a time before we had jet airplanes to get them here, and they did it all legally, and they ended up learning English, and they became productive members of society. But certainly that goes by the wayside for the white liberal, because that says that someone 50 feet away from the American border in Mexico couldn't figure their way around the legal process, despite the people did it 100 years ago, and that people are continuing to do it now. But that's another question. All right, so this idea of a melting pot, you could say New York, not necessarily the United States, but New York as a city, because of that's where immigrants entered. That was the place where they came in to be documented, Ellis Island. England, Europe in general, Germany, France, etc., were never melting pots. That never was a part of European culture. Only a short period after World War II, after the destruction there, was there some migration. Of course, there were invasions. Back then, that's what happened when foreign people pushed across your borders. You called it an invasion. But Europe never had this policy. Only in the last 20 years has Europe been a melting pot. It's not a melting pot. Do you know what Germany was made up of? Germans. Do you know what France was made up of? French. You know what Sweden was made up of? Swedish people. Not Africans, not Asians, not melting pots of diversity. That's all a load of crap. That's not what it was. And it's not what it should be. Now, certainly, we don't want to oppose immigration. Immigration is natural, right? People move from one country to the other, and that should be allowed. But there should be strict controls on this. Open immigration policies serve no one. And let me, while we're on this question, anyone that tells you that that you should support immigration, and of course you're a racist and a xenophobe if you don't support open borders and everybody just pouring in all willy-nilly and doing what they please, anybody that tells you you're a racist or a xenophobe, you should dismiss that person immediately. And furthermore, anybody that tells you that immigration is good for your economy is selling you a bill of goods. There's only one instance in which immigration is good for your economy, and that's when you have a shortage of labor. Does it look like you have a shortage of labor in the United States today? You have 40 to 50 million people unemployed. Do you need any more people who are unemployed coming in? Does it look like you have a shortage of labor in Europe? How many people are unemployed in Europe? But yet immigrants are coming in left and right. It's a bill of goods. All right, so I got to get back to the actual issue at hand here. The African and Middle Eastern immigrants coming into Europe. That's the question. The certain elements in both the mainstream and the alternative media are promoting the Europeans as being heartless thugs, particularly the Hungarians, as heartless thugs who won't allow the poor immigrants to come in, and that they should let these people come in, and that you're racists, you're xenophobes if you dare suggest that Europeans have a culture. Well, I have to say that Europeans, white Europeans, have every right, every bit as much a right to their country and their culture as any other nationality, ethnicity, or race on this earth. And they have a right to oppose these things. And Hungary has an absolute right to say, I'm sorry, but we're not taking in 200,000 immigrants who we can't afford, we don't have jobs for, we can't support, and who have a culture that are so vastly different from ours that it's going to cause social tension. They have an absolute right to do that. Now, I'm not a fan, obviously, we're not a fan of a border fence here in the United States. We want to secure the borders, but a border fence, that's kind of, that's totalitarian. We're not supporting that. Just put the border patrol down there on the border. But in Europe, in the situation that Hungary finds itself in, when its neighbors are actively pushing immigrants into Hungary, we have to say we understand why there's been crack fences put up on the borders. Now, that doesn't justify inhumane treatment of immigrants. It's certainly not the immigrants' fault. They're here to look for a better life, and we should never turn hatred against the immigrants. But what's happening here is you're getting cultural division. It's divide and conquer, okay? Because what you have is you have people with vastly different cultures who are competing for limited resources, and they use one against another. So we'll get into that as well. Let's before we continue on the immigration issue, why is this even happening? Right? Let's look at why this is happening. The ability of Assad to hold out for as long as he has in the face of this onslaught by NATO, and the need for greater use of Western military power has obviously become apparent, right? Because he's held out as long as he has. The proxy terrorists aren't doing the job, so NATO is now attempting to get more involved, and that's behind the creation of the safe zone in Syria by the United States and Turkey. That was one step toward a greater direct military involvement in Syria and the recreation of Libya 2.0, right? We've got the Russian announcement of an expeditionary force in Syria, the upcoming vote on the Iranian nuclear deal in Congress. Well, actually, that's it looks like it's going to go through. All of that's created the need to accelerate the attack on Syria before the Russians become too entrenched and become too helpful, and before Iranian money and supplies can flow even freer to the Syrian army. So this is why we've got the new debate as to whether or not certain European countries should engage in bombing in Syria, France and England, for instance. And this time they're openly stating that Assad and the Syrian forces were going to be the target. In addition to the claim that ISIS would be the main target, they're saying that they're going to attack Assad. So with the British now saying they're considering bombing ISIS, the discussion in England is revolving publicly around the bombing of ISIS, but the true nature of the discussion really revolves around the question of whether or not to engage in the creation of safe havens and the bombing of the Assad forces, right? We've got Lord Carey, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, his Lord Carey, saying that he would support the bombing, but he said that they have to deal with the evil regime of Bashar al-Assad as well as with the ISIS militants. In other words, just destroy Assad. So now we see this influx of immigrants and refugees into Europe being used to frighten the European public with images of Muslim fanatics, and they are there, with hordes of people chanting Allahu Akbar, and they are there, and hordes of people chanting fuck you, and they are there. And so they're using these images, and of course, a lot of the immigrants who are coming to Europe, you can see video of this, attacking Europeans, raping children in the bushes, raping women. Yeah, they are bringing crime because some of these people, again, as I said, we're giving preference to people with fanatical backgrounds, and they're not assimilating at all. As you can see, they're bringing the parts of their culture over. And again, I wouldn't necessarily even consider some of this behavior part of their culture, but they're just bringing this trash, violent rape culture to Europe. And I don't see any white liberals bitching about that. Do you? I don't see any feminists out talking about rape culture when it comes to the Algerian immigrants. I don't see any of that. No, instead they'll go to a college campus and make something up. So we've got these people coming over, and now we're seeing the European public who's already seen their country and their culture destroyed under waves of immigration. Now they're being confronted with the physical violence of dislocation of themselves and their own people, as well as the immigrants. So what's likely to happen is that the European public, and when you're looking at solutions, they're going to throw up their hands and say, just do whatever you have to do to stop ISIS or stop Assad or whatever you have to do. Just get these people out of here and get them back home so we can stop letting them in, as they're ruining the country. And waves of immigrants coming from a war-torn country, fresh with images of drowned children and thirsty adults and general misery. That's going to be used by the responsibility to protect humanitarian bomber crowds of the left liberals, to get that side on board. And then, of course, you've got the legitimately xenophobic, racist right-wingers who are already, supporting every single war that they possibly can. Every single war comes along, they support it. They support it before it exists. So we have the second aspect of this, latest wave of immigration is the destruction of European culture, which I've already talked about. The diverse and opposing cultures, using them as a creation of a divide and conquer strategy so they can break the European people by using an already broken immigrant population, right? So Europe has been overwhelmed with massive waves of immigration from the Middle East and Africa, as well as other third world countries, even before the Syrian crisis. This is only making it worse. Under a number of guises, and it's economic or ethical, the ruling class has opened the floodgates to immigration from countries with vastly different cultures from Europe. And they've done so at a time when the majority of citizens of Europe and European countries are struggling to make ends meet. Don't believe the Bernie Sanders crowd that Northern Europe is the utopia that they want to promote. The influx of immigrants has only worsened the economic situation of European countries who've taken them in. It's created an underclass of low-wage, low-skill workers who are then played off against the indigenous Europeans. There's anger at second-class status that's directed at Europeans from immigrants. And then we have anger at the lowering of wages and living standards that's directed at immigrants from Europeans. And neither group ever really understands it's the oligarchy that they've created these conditions. So they turn their anger on one another. And again, I don't want anybody to take what I'm saying on this radio show as being anti-immigrant. Because I've said before, these people are only coming to either find refuge from the conflict in Syria, for instance, or because they want a better life, because their country has been turned into an absolute cesspit. And it's been turned into a cesspit largely by NATO and by the United States and by the IMF and by the banks. And so they're looking for a better life. So my answer, so I would like to point out to everybody listening, do not turn against your neighbor. Do not turn against anyone who's sought asylum in your country. Now, judge people on an individual basis. But don't look at someone who's an immigrant and automatically shun them or go out and scream at them and that sort of stuff. That's despicable. The enemy here is the government that created the situation that made them want to leave, and the enemy is the government that created the situation in which they were allowed to enter your country. The enemy is not the immigrant. So remember that. Now, that being said, there's been a concerted effort to open the floodgates for immigration in Europe, particularly in Britain, for social engineering purposes, and that cannot be denied. We had Andrew Neither, who's a former advisor to Tony Blair, Jack Straw, and David Blunkett. He admitted that there had been a plan by government ministers, basically Straw, Blair, and the Labour Party, to allow so much immigration into Britain that it would change the face of the country forever, and boy, has it ever. But there's also a third component to this immigration situation. That's the potential for a false flag event blamed on Muslim extremists who entered Europe as a result of the migration crisis, and North America should be included in that too, through the Mexican border, for instance, and with extremist elements being given preferential treatment. The situation indeed would be ripe for exploitation, as Europe will play host to a major increase in the number of patsies and Islamist dupes residing inside its borders. Same thing for North America. We've been prepped for the last few years. Remember Miss Lindsey Graham saying that we'll have the massive terror attack in Charleston. He's been talking about a new 9/11 with nuclear weapons for a long time, and so is Darth Cheney. So, again, if it does take place, then we need to realize who's the real enemy here and who was responsible for it. So we need to bear that in mind. I've gone on this immigration question, and I haven't even gotten to the other things yet. So, okay, the solutions. I've went through this already. First of all, it's important to say that one of the solutions that Europe can't continue to accept these immigrants. They've got to stop it. Stop immigration into Europe. In fact, Europe's had so much immigration in the last few years, they could probably even put a hold on immigration, period, for a number of years. But stop allowing them in. Stop it. That's the first step. Now, the second step would be to stop funding terrorism. It's specifically to Europe. If the Europeans want to stop their involvement in supporting terrorism and the United States and Saudi Arabia and Turkey don't want to, well then fine. Let the United States, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia go dig their own graves. It's going to happen anyway. Let them do it. Let them take all of the responsibility. Let them take all of the repercussions. But overall, the solution would be to stop funding or supporting ISIS, the Free Syrian Army, Nusra, any other moderate cannibal in the Middle East. It would be to allow the Syrian government to just wipe these losers off of the territory, preferably with the assistance and intelligence provided by Europe and the United States to help the Syrian government do that, maybe arming the Kurds, maybe arming the Syrian government to do that. And then, of course, the sort of rebuilding situation, using the nationalized Fed to provide credit to build products here in the United States, materials, send it to the Syrian government, and help them rebuild Syria and bring back the immigrants that want to come back, bring them back, build Syria again, and do it right, improve the situation in Syria. That would provide jobs, that would provide the ability to rebuild the country in the correct way, and hopefully the Syrian government could engage in using their own national banks to issue credit for industry in that country as well. So there is that. That's the solution, I would argue. And I've got a couple articles up there on that on BrandonTurbeville.com. So I think we've gone through that well enough. Now we've got just to see if we can sum up as much as we can in the next couple of minutes. We had the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov calling out the United States for protecting ISIS, saying that the United States has ulterior motives. We had, for instance, in an interview with Voskresnoye Vremya, which is the Sunday Time on Russia's Channel 1, Lavrov said, quote, analyzing the actions of coalition member states, one cannot but suspect they have ulterior motives beyond the stated goal of fighting the Islamic State. He also said, quote, some of our colleagues among the coalition members told us they sometimes knew where certain ISIL regiments were stationed, but the coalition's command, which is obviously the U.S., did not give them the permission for an airstrike. Well, isn't that something? We've been telling you that for the last, the last 4 years. We've been telling you that the United States doesn't want to bomb ISIS. Lavrov says that if the United States were really serious about its fight against ISIS, it would have cooperated with the Syrian government. What I just said, in other words, and the Kurds. What I just said, in other words. And other interested parties, which means, of course, Russia or anybody else who's interested in fighting ISIS. This is what Lavrov said. If their goal is to prevent the consolidation of Iraqi and Syrian territories as the heartland of an ISIL-promoted caliphate, they should focus on helping those who are fighting these rebels on the ground, the Iraqi army, the Iraqi Kurds, the Syrian army, and Syrian Kurdish militias. If coalition forces acted together with the government of the Syrian Arab Republic and not only their sworn ally, the Iraqi government, and harmonized their approaches with those of Syrian armed forces on the ground, the combined effect would have been much stronger than what we have now. End quote. That's Lavrov. So there we are. Now, we need to move on over, I guess Assad echoed those comments as well. He said, Assad called out the U.S. for supporting terrorism as well. He did an interview with RT. He said, quote, "It's not about that Europe didn't accept them or embrace them as refugees." He's talking about the ones that are coming into Europe now. "It's not about dealing with the cause. It's about not dealing with the cause. If you are worried about them, the refugees, stop supporting terrorists. That's what we think regarding the crisis. This is the core of the whole issue of refugees. If we ask any Syrian today about what they want, the first thing they would say, we want security and safety for every person and every family." So, here's that. He also says, quote, "If you want to implement anything real, it's impossible to do anything while you have people being killed. Bloodletting hasn't stopped. People feel insecure. I would like to take this opportunity to call on all forces to unite against terrorism because it is the way to achieve the political objectives which we as Syrians want through dialogue and political action." So he's there. You can see the video. I've linked to that in my article, and he's really called the United States out for supporting terrorism. He actually said at some point in the interview, if you want to stop terrorism, stop funding it and supporting it. All right. Lastly, Japan. Japan has had, since the end of the Second World War, a constitutional constraint on the Japanese military, which says that the Japanese military cannot be used for offensive purposes. It cannot be used to, quote, protect national interests, with, that catch-all phrase that the United States uses to slaughter innocent people overseas all the time, protecting national interests. It can't be used for anything other than self-defense of the national territory. Now, that has been a source of pride for the Japanese people since the end of World War II. Well, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, the current Prime Minister, has pushed for security bills that would have removed that constraint and allow the Japanese government basically to be used for imperialist purposes yet again, despite what happened to Japan the last time they did that. The Japanese people, those few of them who pay attention to what's going on in Japan, they have gone out and protested, and this appears to be organic, right? This appears to be organic, that they are old people, young people, students, the elderly. They're all out protesting these bills to prevent that. They don't want to see Japan become America, basically. In fact, one of the protesters said that. She actually said, "Everyone's life is important. I think members of the self-defense forces will quit. Maybe the only way to get troops will be a draft. And if not by force, there will be a sort of economic draft in which the less fortunate are lured by promise of economic rewards for service. We're becoming like America. That's frightening." Well, it's frightening indeed. So, unfortunately, the Japanese just passed those bills. So we have a return to Japanese imperialism, unfortunately, and against the will of the Japanese people. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. We'll see you next week.